I had grease on my fingers, sweat dripping down my back, and a stubborn bike chain that refused to stay in place. That was my afternoon. I was hunched over in my driveway, crouched next to my old matte black mountain bike, trying to fix the chain for the third time that week. The sun was relentless, and the concrete beneath me was hot enough to fry something on if I'd had the patience. I didn't hear her approach, not at first. "You look like you've got your hands full," a woman's voice said, smooth and amused. I looked up, blinking through the sunlight. She was standing on the sidewalk just outside my yard, wearing a simple summer dress and dark sunglasses. Her brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, and though I couldn't guess her exact age, I could tell, she wasn't in her 20s. She had a different kind of presence. Not flashy or loud, just collected. Like she'd already lived through all the noise and didn't need to prove anything anymore. "Yeah," I said, wiping my hands on my shorts. "Stubborn chain." She smiled, not just with her mouth, but with this amused tilt of her head, like she was reading a page in a book she'd already memorized. Then she said it, "If I were younger, I'd ask you for a ride." I froze for just a moment. I didn't know what to say. I'd never had someone say something like that to me, especially not someone like her. There was nothing suggestive in her tone, nothing forced. Just honest, light, maybe even wistful. A line dropped in the summer air, like a leaf floating gently to the ground. I managed to smile. "Who says you can't ask now?" She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Enjoy the ride, neighbor." Then she turned and kept walking, her steps slow and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. I stood there a while, tools still scattered around me, the bike completely forgotten. I watched her disappear around the corner, wondering who she was, where she lived, how I'd never seen her before. Or maybe I had and just never noticed. That thought sat heavy with me. I'd been so consumed with fixing the house, the yard, the leaky pipes, the peeling paint, that I hadn't really seen anyone. Not really. Later that evening, when the sun had dipped behind the rooftops and the sky turned that soft orange pink you only get for a few minutes, I sat on my porch swing with a cold soda and nothing else to do. Kids were laughing somewhere down the street, someone's sprinkler hissed in the distance, and a dog barked twice before going quiet. All normal, all ordinary. But my eyes kept drifting back toward the corner, like maybe she'd appear again, walking back the way she came. She didn't. I leaned back against the swing, listening to it creak softly under my weight, and just stared at the sky. The cicadas had started up, filling the silence with their own version of a lullaby. I thought about how long I'd been working on this place, how every nail and coat of paint felt like proof that I could make something mine, something lasting. But no matter how much I patched or fixed, it never occurred to me that what I really needed was for something, or someone, to catch me off guard. The streetlights blinked on one by one. My soda had gone warm in my hand. Still, I didn't move. I just let the quiet settle over me like a thin blanket. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. Just a sense that something had shifted, like the air had changed and I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until it happened. Maybe moving here wouldn't be as quiet as I thought. It was 3 days later when I heard the knock. Soft. Not urgent, just enough to stir me from my half-asleep morning haze. I had just come out of the shower, hair still damp, wearing an old t-shirt that clung to my back from the heat. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most days, no one knocked. I didn't even get mail regularly yet. When I opened the door, there she was. She stood there with that same effortless presence, sunglasses pushed up on her head, revealing warm hazel eyes that made me forget how to say hello for a second. She wore light jeans and a loose white blouse, and in her hands was a small white box tied with a ribbon. "Hi," she said, with that easy smile like we'd known each other for longer than a moment on a sidewalk. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I replied quickly, stepping aside instinctively to give her room even though she hadn't asked to come in. Can I help you? She held out the box. It's a welcome gift. Donuts. From a little bakery a few streets over. I figured you probably haven't had much time to explore yet. I stared at the box like it had appeared out of nowhere. Then I looked at her, and something about the way she stood, casual, patient, not expecting anything in return, disarmed me completely. Wow. Thank you. That's incredibly kind of you. I'm Elizabeth, she added. But most people just call me Liz. I'm Jake, I said, offering a small smile. And yeah, you're right. I've mostly been glued to home repairs. Haven't really gotten out much. I noticed, she said, with a soft laugh. I've seen you out here with tools more than once. It broke whatever ice might have been there. I hesitated, then gestured behind me toward the kitchen. Would you like to come in for coffee? It's nothing fancy, but the place has 4 walls and working plumbing now. She laughed again, and the sound of it was easy. Familiar. Sure. I'd love a cup. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, 2 mismatched chairs pulled close, the afternoon light stretching across the countertops like a soft film. I poured her coffee, and we opened the box of donuts between us, 6 perfect circles of sugar and glaze. She took a bite and nodded approvingly. These are my guilty pleasure, she said. Especially on slow days. Is today a slow day? Rarely, she said with a shrug. But I made time. She told me she lived just a few houses down in the blue house with the big oak tree. 15 years, same home. She raised 2 kids there, both now away at college. She mentioned it casually, but her voice shifted when she said it, just slightly. Their father left when they were young, she said, her fingers curling gently around the coffee mug. We got married too young. When things got hard, he just left. I looked at her, unsure what to say. I'm sorry. That must have been really hard. It was, she said, but there wasn't bitterness. Just a kind of quiet acceptance, the way you talk about a storm after the skies cleared. But I figured it out. You kind of have to when there's no one else coming. I told her about my own past, how I'd been saving up since I was 16 doing odd jobs, how I dropped out of college when tuition got too steep, how I'd been slowly fixing this house piece by piece, paycheck to paycheck. I glanced around at the half-done walls and the light fixture still missing a cover. It's not perfect, I said. But it's mine. And I like the challenge. She looked around, taking it in like she saw more than most people would. You should be proud, she said, and her voice held no fluff, no pity. Just truth. Most young guys your age wouldn't have the patience or the heart to build something like this. I shrugged, not sure how to take a compliment like that. It felt too big. Too real. But I appreciated it. There was a moment when neither of us spoke. Just the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock, the warmth of coffee cups cooling between our fingers. It didn't feel awkward. Just calm. Like the air in a room after a long-needed rain. She glanced at the time and smiled gently. I should probably get going before I overstay my welcome. The pleasure was mine, I said, and I meant it. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the frame. Then she turned back, a slight smile on her lips. By the way, I meant what I said the other day. I raised an eyebrow. About the ride? She chuckled, a soft sound that held something deeper this time. About wishing I was a little younger. And just like that, she was gone again, sunlight catching in her hair as she stepped back into the street. I stood there for a moment, hand still resting on the door, a silly grin creeping onto my face I couldn't explain. She had made time. For me. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I kept busy with house projects, patching a hole in the bathroom wall, fixing a leaky window frame, trimming the wild jungle that passed for my front yard. But every time I stepped outside, I caught myself glancing toward the corner, half hoping to see her walking by again. I told myself not to read into things. It was just donuts and coffee. Just a neighbor being kind. Still, something about her stayed in the back of my mind like the soft echo of a song you didn't realize you knew the words to. It was Wednesday, warm, breezy, one of those afternoons where even the birds sounded relaxed. I was out front, trying to replace a loose board on my porch steps. It wasn't going well. The wood kept splitting at the ends, and my hammer had somehow vanished into the Bermuda Triangle of missing tools. Sweat rolled down my neck, and my knees ached from crouching. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, steady. Familiar. "Hey, handyman." I looked up. She was standing just beyond the walkway, wearing light blue jeans and a simple beige sweater with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her brown hair was tied loosely, falling over one shoulder, and a silver necklace glinted at her collarbone. She smiled at me like I was exactly the person she wanted to see. "You're out again." I stood and wiped my hands on the back of my jeans. At this point, I feel like the unofficial maintenance guy for the whole block. She laughed softly and stepped closer, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "You're doing a good job. The place looks better every time I walk by." I glanced at the uneven boards and raised an eyebrow. "Still a long way to go. I guess I'm a work in progress too." She tilted her head, studying me for a second longer than necessary. "Aren't we all?" For a moment, neither of us said anything. It wasn't awkward, it was just full. Like there were too many things that could be said and neither of us knew which one to start with. She shifted her weight slightly. "I hate to ask, but I've got this leaky faucet in the kitchen. It's been driving me crazy for weeks. I've tried tightening it myself, but, well." I smiled. "I can take a look, if you want." Her eyes lit up. "You'd really do that?" "Of course. Lead the way." I packed up my tools and followed her down the street to the blue house with the oak tree. It looked exactly like she'd described, welcoming but worn, lived in all the right ways. Flowers lined the front path, and the paint had begun to fade a little around the edges. But it had charm, the kind that doesn't come from money but from time. Inside, the kitchen was warm and cozy. Cream-colored cabinets, a farmhouse sink that looked older than both of us, and photos everywhere, graduations, birthdays, baby pictures. The kind of life that filled a space long before you even stepped in. As I crouched under the sink, tightening a valve with a wrench, she leaned back against the counter, watching me. There was a pause, long enough to notice. "You know," she said slowly, "I really admire how hardworking you are. Most guys your age wouldn't even know how to hold a wrench." I chuckled without looking up. Necessity teaches you fast when you're broke and everything you own keeps falling apart. She laughed, a rich, low sound that settled into the walls. I tightened one more screw and stood up, wiping my hands on an old towel she handed me. "All done. Should be good now." She tested the faucet. The drip stopped. She turned to me, smiling. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "But thank you. It's no problem." She hesitated, then reached out and touched my forearm, just lightly. Just enough. It lasted only a second, but it sent something humming beneath my skin. "I owe you," she added, pulling her hand back. "Let me buy you dinner." I blinked. "That's really not necessary." "It's just dinner, Jake," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Let me." I nodded before I could think twice. "Okay. Sure." She smiled, and something about it lingered. Not flirtatious. Not formal. Just warm, and a little brave. The kind of smile that told me she wasn't asking out of politeness. Later that night, back at home, I sat on my porch again, the same soda in my hand, untouched. The moon was climbing higher, casting pale light over the street, and I could still feel the ghost of her touch on my arm. I didn't know what this was turning into. I only knew I was saying yes without hesitation. It's just dinner, Jake. Friday came faster than I expected. I spent most of the day second-guessing what to wear and wondering if spaghetti sauce on my jeans would make me look like a kid. I kept telling myself it was just dinner, just a thank you, but the way she looked at me that afternoon in her kitchen told me it was something more. I showed up right on time at a small Italian place about 10 minutes from the neighborhood. It had red and white checkered tablecloths, dim lighting, and framed black and white photos of Italy on the walls. It felt timeless. Comfortable. Like a place people came to tell the truth. She was already there when I arrived, seated near the window. She wore a navy blouse and simple gold earrings, her hair pulled back but still loose enough to feel effortless. When she saw me, she smiled in that quiet way she did, like I was the only person in the room. We started off talking about the usual things. Home repairs. How she once tried to fix a ceiling fan and nearly broke her wrist. How I'd spent hours trying to replace a bathroom mirror without cracking the drywall. We laughed more than I expected. She had a dry wit that crept up on you. The food came. Pasta and wine and warm bread. The kind of meal that didn't rush you. We ate slowly, and somewhere between the second glass and the last forkful, the conversation began to shift. It got quieter. Deeper. She told me about raising her kids. About the lonely nights. About trying to hold it all together when everything inside her felt like it was unraveling. There's something about an empty house after your children leave, she said softly, swirling her wine. It's like you've been waiting years for a moment you never really wanted. I didn't speak. I just listened. Really listened. There was no need to fill the space. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. I shared my own story too. About dropping out of college because it got too expensive. About working 2 jobs and coming home too tired to cook anything that didn't come from a microwave. About wondering if any of it would ever lead to something real. You've done well for yourself, she said gently. You should be proud. The restaurant slowly emptied around us. Plates were cleared. Lights dimmed further. But neither of us moved. The air between us had shifted. It was no longer just dinner. No longer just kindness. Something unspoken was rising quietly between us, like steam off a cooling plate. We stepped outside into the soft hush of night. The street was quiet. Just a few people passing by, the faint hum of traffic blocks away, a breeze brushing her hair against her cheek. We walked slowly, side by side, back toward our homes, not saying much but not needing to. At the corner where our paths would split, she stopped. Her house glowed gently through the trees. Thank you, Jake, she whispered. I had a really nice time. Me too, I said, more honestly than I expected. She reached out and brushed her fingers lightly along my arm. It wasn't bold. It wasn't hesitant either. Just a touch, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that didn't need to be said aloud. Good night, she murmured. I smiled, unsure of what to do with my hands, my heart still catching up. Good night, Liz. She turned and walked toward her front door. I stood on the sidewalk and watched her until she disappeared inside, the porch light flickering behind her like a held breath. The street around me was still, painted in silver and shadow. I didn't move. I couldn't. Something inside me was quietly rewiring itself, piece by piece, like a map I didn't know I'd been following suddenly making sense. Later, as I rode my bike home under the dim glow of the street lamps, I couldn't stop replaying the night in my head. The warmth in her eyes. The way she listened. The way she touched my arm like it mattered. I had dated girls before, casual, fleeting, fun. But none of them made me feel like I was stepping into something I didn't want to step out of. I parked the bike, sat on the porch, and looked down the street. Her light was still on. And I sat there, quiet, content, my heart still holding on to something she said just before we left the table. It feels like you've been waiting years for a moment you never really wanted. The days after our dinner felt different, like the air between us had shifted. We didn't talk about it, not directly, but something had opened up that night and quietly stayed open. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, like a door left slightly ajar, letting in a breeze you didn't know you needed. I started noticing how often we found excuses to see each other. She'd wave from her garden when I walked past. I'd cross the street just to say hello. One afternoon, she brought over a plate of muffins she'd baked, just because. Another day, she knocked on my door holding a stubborn jar of pasta sauce and smiled like she already knew I wouldn't say no. "I can never open these things," she said, laughing. "It's like the universe is testing my patience." I popped the lid off with one twist, and she raised an eyebrow. "You made that look too easy. Dangerous talent." We both laughed, standing there in her kitchen, the sauce jar between us like some strange excuse for gravity. I stayed longer than I needed to that day. She offered me coffee, and we sat outside on her back porch under a canopy of soft string lights. The sun had just started to dip, casting everything in that warm golden haze that makes the world feel like it's breathing slower. We didn't talk about anything important. We didn't have to. That became our rhythm. Little moments strung together like beads on a quiet thread. I'd find myself walking past her house more than I should have. She'd find reasons to wave me inside. We cooked together some nights. Nothing fancy, just pasta, stir-fry, pancakes at odd hours. We talked about books, music, terrible DIY fails, the movies we both secretly loved but wouldn't admit to anyone else. Sometimes we sat in silence, both of us tired, content just to exist in the same space. One night, I invited her over to mine. I cleaned the kitchen twice and made spaghetti the way my mom used to. I even lit a candle, though I pretended it was just to keep the mosquitoes away. We ate outside at my little patio table, the moon high and full above us. Her hair caught the moonlight, and she laughed more that night than I'd ever heard her laugh before. At some point, the conversation slowed. Not because it died, but because we didn't need it to keep going. We sat there, the night wrapped around us, and I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. She met my gaze, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You make me feel alive again, Jake. I don't know how to explain it." I swallowed, unsure how to respond without sounding too young, too simple. But the truth was, I felt it too. There was something about her that stilled the noise in my head. With her, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I could just be. We didn't rush anything. When she leaned forward to kiss me, it wasn't sudden or awkward. It was soft. Certain. Her lips warm, her hands resting lightly on either side of my face. It lasted longer than I expected but still ended too soon. We paused, eyes still locked, and neither of us said a word. We didn't have to. The silence held everything we needed to hear. That kiss changed things. After that, our nights together grew longer. I'd ride over to her house after dark, and she'd leave the porch light on for me. Sometimes we'd sit curled up on her couch watching old movies. Sometimes we'd dance barefoot in the living room to music from her youth. Sometimes we said nothing at all and just held each other until the room faded and the world outside stopped mattering. She told me more about her past, her marriage, her heartbreak, her dreams that had faded over time. One night, with her head resting on my chest, she whispered, "When I was younger, I thought I had it all figured out. Marriage, kids, the perfect house. But life had other plans. I spent 20 years taking care of everyone else. I forgot I was more than just someone's mother. I held her tighter. I didn't say much. I just whispered back, "Then let me give you that. Even if it's just for a little while." The night settled around us like a soft blanket, and I could feel her breathing slow, her body relax into mine. The world outside didn't go away, but in that moment, it felt a little further off. And for the first time in a long while, neither of us felt alone. We never talked about what we were. There were no labels, no plans, no declarations. It wasn't boyfriend and girlfriend. It wasn't a fling either. It was just us. A quiet, hidden space we carved out where things felt simple, even when we knew they weren't. At first, we avoided being seen together too close to home. Not because we were ashamed, but because we didn't want to explain something that didn't need explaining. I took her to the city. Small concerts. Late dinners. Open mic nights. Places where no one knew us, and no one cared. The first time I brought her to one of my favorite spots, a cozy, half-lit jazz bar tucked between two forgotten streets, she looked around like she'd stepped into someone else's dream. The music was loud, the crowd young, the energy fast. She clung to my arm a little tighter at first, unsure. "This is insane," she said over the music, breathless from dancing. "I haven't done this in 20 years. I smiled and pulled her closer. "Then tonight's for you." And she let go. I watched her spin, laugh, dance with a joy that felt unfiltered. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and for a moment, I saw a version of her no one else had bothered to see in years. She was stunning, not because of how she looked, but because of how fully she was living again. That night, we walked back through the city just before sunrise. Empty streets. Coffee shops opening. Streetlights still glowing faintly. She held my hand the whole way back to my bike, leaned into my chest as the sky turned blue, and whispered, "I feel alive again." And I believed her. Because I felt it too. Back home, things returned to their quiet rhythm. I'd spend my days on job sites or sanding down the porch railings. At night, I'd pedal over to her house, the porch light always waiting for me like a signal. We cooked. We talked. We made up silly games with movie quotes. We danced in socks on hardwood floors. Some nights we made love slowly, wordlessly, like the world outside didn't exist. There was no urgency, no pressure to turn this into something it wasn't. We knew it had a beginning. And we knew, even if we didn't say it, that it would have an end. But that made every small moment feel louder. More vivid. Like we were holding time gently in our hands, trying not to drop it. One evening, we sat on her porch swing, glasses of wine in hand, watching the sun melt into the trees. The air was soft. Birds chirped lazily from the oak. We didn't say much for a while. Then she turned to me and said, "I want you to know this has been the happiest I've been in years." I looked at her, wanting to say something equally true but not knowing how. "Me too," I said quietly. She studied my face in the fading light. I could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying pressing just behind her eyes. Then she reached out and brushed her fingers along mine, gentle, like she didn't want to startle the silence. "I know this can't last, Jake," she said. "You're going to meet someone your age. You'll have a family. A normal life." I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed. But because part of me knew she wasn't wrong. "Promise me something," she continued, her voice softer now. "Promise me you'll remember me. Not as the older woman down the street. But as the person who made you smile when you were still figuring things out." I turned toward her and gently touched her cheek with the back of my fingers. "I promise." We didn't say anything else that night. We just sat there, the porch swaying slightly beneath us, as the sky grew darker and the first stars began to appear. Her hand never left mine. The world didn't change. No music swelled. No revelation dropped from the sky. It was just two people, sitting still, holding a moment they knew they'd miss even before it was gone. And somehow, that made it even more beautiful. As summer slipped quietly into fall, our rhythm began to shift. Not in a dramatic way, there were no arguments, no slammed doors, no sharp words. Just space. Subtle at first. Liz took on more hours at her volunteer center. Her sons came home for short visits. I got offered a full-time construction job, and most nights I came home too tired to think. We still saw each other. Still shared cups of coffee and soft glances. But the evenings grew shorter. The moments less frequent. The silences stretched longer between our footsteps. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew. Something we'd held gently in our hands was beginning to change shape. One afternoon, I stopped by her house to return a book she'd lent me. Just a dog-eared paperback with notes in the margins and a small coffee stain on the corner. She smiled when she opened the door, like she hadn't been expecting me but was glad I came anyway. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. We sat on the porch swing again, just like we had so many times before. The sky was a pale gray, and leaves rustled across the sidewalk like whispers. We didn't talk about anything important. Just little things, the weather, her trip to visit family, the neighbor's new fence. Then came a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just full, like something important had arrived but neither of us wanted to be the one to unwrap it. She looked down at her hands and said softly, "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. "You gave me my youth again, Jake," she continued, her voice warm but edged with something quieter. "Not the years or the smooth skin or the speed of life. But the feeling. Of being seen. Of laughing without checking a clock. Of being more than someone's mom or someone's past." I swallowed and looked at her, really looked at her. The lines near her eyes, the way her mouth curved when she tried not to cry, the strength in how gently she spoke. "You gave me something too," I said. "You showed me what it means to really be there for someone. Not out of obligation. Just because you want to." She smiled then, not with her mouth, but with her whole face, like something inside her had just exhaled for the first time. We hugged for a long time. Her cheek rested lightly on my shoulder, her hands pressed to my back. I didn't want to let go. Not yet. Not completely. When we finally pulled apart, she kissed me on the cheek. Soft. Certain. "Goodbye, Jake." I nodded. "Goodbye, Liz." I walked home under a sky full of gold and gray, the kind of evening that makes the world feel both big and still. Leaves crunched beneath my boots, and the air had that crisp smell of endings. I didn't cry. But I felt the ache of something beautiful closing. Back on my porch, I turned to look down the street. Her house sat there, just as it always had. The porch light was still on. A small, steady glow in the quiet. That was the last night we were anything more than neighbors. We never made a big deal of it. We'd wave now and then. Say hello while grabbing mail. She still smiled the same way, and I still felt it, deep down. But we both moved forward, the way people do when they've loved quietly and completely and know it's time to let go. Years passed. I built a life. A real one. I still live in that house. Still fix things with the same old tools. Sometimes I ride past her place, not out of habit, but out of something softer. A memory. A promise. I never told anyone about us. I didn't need to. Some things aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be kept, like songs only you remember. And every time I pass her house and see that familiar porch light, I smile to myself. I remember. I kept my promise.